I'm Leo Ward at Kit Guru, and this cooler here is the Be Quiet Dark Rock TF. A little while ago we saw the Dark Rock Pro 3, which was an update from the 2, where they had improved the mounting mechanism for the cooler. The mounts have been carried over wholesale to this new TF. The significant difference is instead of being a great big upright box type of cooler, it's a horizontal cooler, and you have these two 135mm Be Quiet fans that mount on those rubber sort of rests there, and the second fan slips in like so. So it's an evolution of the cooler we've previously seen, but significantly smaller, slimmer, and much lower profile. That's significant. Now, this cooler stands about 120mm tall, 130 if you go for the absolute worst case scenario, which means that it compares very favourably to many box coolers. But it's not low profile in the true sense of small form factor, no way, no how. But if you have a slender case, which typically is 220mm wide overall, there's a very good chance this cooler is going to go in without any trouble whatsoever. So you can put a high-end motherboard and processor inside pretty much any case on the market, apart from when you start to get really thin. Media Center, on the other hand, unlikely. The cooler with a single fan is rated as a 150-watt TDP. Add in the second fan and you get to the 220-watt TDP. That is extreme, and the mounting mechanism means you can mount it on pretty much any CPU either on the market now or in the recent past. You're going every form of AMD processor in living memory since socket A. That's because AMD has used the same mounts for ages now. That's the backplate you get on your motherboard, and you have these two plastic fellas with these sort of lugs. That system has remained the same, therefore you can use this cooler on everything from, I think, socket 939 up to present day. As to whether you're likely to do that, that's a different question. On the Intel front, you've got Extreme Edition. It's the standard thing where you have the frame on your LJ11 2011 motherboard, four sort of little double-ended studs, and then you put your cooler in place. Alternatively, you've got this backplate, which has a variety of holes, but these three at the corners will allow you to go everything from LGA 775, which is Core 2 Duo, to 115X, which is the current Core i357, up to 1366, which is the early Core i7. So this cooler fits everything. Now, considering it retails, it's about to go on sale at a list price of £62 in VAT. By contrast, the Noctua NHD 15, which is the 150mm great big box beast, that's £68.50 at the minute. I had a quick look just a few minutes ago. Or alternatively, say a Corsair Hydra 75, 120mm liquid cooler, thick radiator, £65. That means that this cooler is up against all the significant players in the market. The thing is, I can't reconcile this business about you can install it on everything. I don't really see that, because you are not going to put this cooler on a Core 2 Duo. That's not going to happen. LJ 775, that's a thing of the past. 1366, that's a bit tricky, because you might be using an X58 motherboard in this day and age, possibly. I doubt it. If you are, I very much doubt you decide it's time to change the cooler. So I'm not so sure I see that. I don't really see why Be Quiet didn't go down the Noctua route of give you AMD mounts, Intel 115X mounts. They also come up with variants which cover 1366, but 775, it's silly, I think. So we've got AMD and we've got Intel. Let's just go through mounting this to, in this instance, this ASRock Z97 with a Core i7 on it. That's 1155. So we take our cooler, we have these two mounting brackets here, and we have this bit of hardware here. Now the thing is, because it allows you to mount to these three versions of Intel, and because you have to be able to screw in these studs from the back of the motherboard into female threads, you have to have some female threads. And the way they've done that is they've supplied these sort of sleeve nuts with some chunky nuts and a little flat spanner, which is here. And then you do up. your nuts like so. Tighten your nuts with your spanner. Now this is something you certainly want to do before you put your hardware in your case. Then you take these tiny little screws and you attach the bracket to the heatsink like so. You don't want to bend down on this too hard, lean down too hard, because you've got 6mm heat pipes. The whole thing flexes if you put any pressure on it. And that's not a good thing to do. Right, now that is the cooler ready to go. Then we take the back plate and we take these 4 studs. Now these are the mounts we're interested in, and we're interested in the middle position. And we put the studs in place like so. And then we reach for our motherboard, and then I'll try to juggle with the thing. And we take it like so. Now, Intel uses a square pattern of holes, but you need to put the plate in like that rather than like that, because you have to clear these lugs in the CPU mounting plate. So we do that like so, and then we turn to the front with these 4 plastic clips, and these were introduced in the Pro 3, and believe you me, this is an advance over previous Be Quiet coolers, which were just tricky as anything to install. And we put the clip around the stud to secure it like so. Now I think we can agree this ASRock Z97 board is an entirely conventional board. You've got a reasonable amount of clearance around the CPU socket. The idea of doing that with the board mounted in your case, hard work. If you do it on the bench, not so difficult. The thing is, I'm now going to have access to the back of the board, you see, to these 4 screws, to rotate them, to secure them in these nuts, which means that if I do it on the bench, that's not so difficult. If I try doing it in the case, I'm going in the back whilst holding this in the front. That's tricky work. So this is very much a case of put your whole assembly together on the bench. Now, Intel, as I mentioned, uses a square pattern of mounting, so I can go there, 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 or there, but not really. The reason is, if I go like that, then I'm kind of overshadowing the end of the board, but it's not a problem. However, I am definitely overshadowing the fan headers and also the EPS connector. If I go like so, that works, except the heat pipes are overshadowing the memory. With this Corsair LP memory, that isn't an issue. If I was using some Kingston HyperX with the T1 cooler, that could be a problem. If I go around like so, that works. We are coming up close to the top of the graphics card, but we should be okay. And if we put the heat pipes towards the I/O panel like that, then we're fine, because the VRM heatsink on this ASRock is low profile, so not an issue, and it means that the cooler overhangs the memory and it's all fine. But you will see that the mounting orientation of the cooler, it depends on your hardware. If you've got sticky uppy bits in your motherboard here, that could be a problem. If you're using tool memory, that could be a problem. It also depends on your case. Some cases have loads of clearance at the top of the board, others do not. Obviously, if you're using an air cooler, you wouldn't expect to have a radiator mounted here in your case, but you may well have fans in the case at the top. So it depends on your hardware how you do things. Anyway, that's the Intel mounting system. Straightforward enough, but made more difficult by these sliding nuts, which realistically we don't need, because you're not going to use it on LGA 1366, you're not going to use it on LGA 775. Let's just remove those 4 clips, like so, and take out the back plate, like that, and put it there. And then let's swap in AMD. Now AMD, this is a vexed thing. If ever a CPU needed decent cooling, AMD is the one that needs it. The thing is, are you going to buy yourself a 100, 120 pound CPU and slap on a 62 pound cooler? It makes sense. The problem is that you're less likely to do it. If you're going with AMD, unless you're a fanboy, the likelihood is you're going with AMD because you want to save money. You want to save money, do you go high-end air cooler? I mean, yes, it makes sense. I just don't think it's very likely. So that's with the studs in the correct position, and then we put on the 4 clips. Now you'll notice but there's actually a certain amount of movement there because the studs are a lot smaller than the holes, and the clips kind of lock it in place, and it's bound to be off center, so you might have to kind of pull it to the correct position when you mount the cooler. That goes like so. And then we change the brackets. So we take off these things, these sliding nuts and all the rest of it, like that. And we reach for these extraordinary brackets I've got over there. You'll note I've removed the stock AMD backplate and mounts. That's that, and we reach in for these. Now it's easy to sort out the orientation because they've got these countersunk holes. So we put that on like so. And we note that there are these extra holes that we don't quite understand. Bit peculiar. More holes than necessary for this cooler. Suggests a multi-purpose bracket to me. And we put these screws in there. By the way, Be Quiet does not supply you with a screwdriver. You will need a screwdriver. Not a big deal, but it's a sort of number 1 point screwdriver. A big chunky Phillips isn't going to be your friend. And I'm supporting this while I do this. And then I offer it up. Now again, I have to rotate the studs from the back. Now the point here is that AMD uses a rectangular pattern, so I'm either going in this orientation here or this orientation here. Those are my two choices. If I go with the heat pipes towards the I/O panel again, then I'm overshadowing the memory, but I've got enough clearance. If I go this way round, the heat pipes are hanging over the memory. Not a problem with this AMD branded Radeon memory. Could be an issue if I've got taller memory. So you're going to put your cooler like that. Now, in that orientation, that works. It just does. But you need to assemble it on board before you slap it in your case. That is absolutely, in my opinion, a necessity, not an option. The other thing is putting the fans on. Now, we've got 2 fans and 4 of these clips. And the clips go like so, open end into hole, open end into hole, and goes on like that, and then it goes under the fans. The thing is, I don't think you can actually do it like I'm showing you there and then pull it into place because you haven't got any stretch in the system. And I think you'll damage fan fins on the cooler if you try and do that. So you actually are obliged to instead put the clip like so and then spring the end into place, which is doable, but look at it. It's quite a nasty piece of sharp wire, and you've got to do 4 of those. That's a very good way of stabbing yourself in the thumb, and we don't enjoy doing that. Again, you need to do this before you put the hardware in the case. I'm not just talking put the cooler on the motherboard, I'm talking and put the fans in place as well. Which on the plus side does mean it'll be easier for you to then hook up the Y connector for the 2 fans and plug it into the correct header. But it means you're putting in the entire assembly in one. That's not the end of the world, but logically it means if you wish to do anything whatsoever to your fans, your cooler, your thermal compound, your processor, potentially your memory, it means you're very likely going to end up taking the motherboard out of your chassis to do anything that could be a simple job and is instead going to become a bigger job. Obviously, once you've got your hardware in place, you're then doing your wiring for your power supply, you're doing your graphics card or cards and all the rest of it. So this is the first part of the job, is to basically assemble this subsystem on the table, and then you put it in your case. All doable, but potentially you're stacking up work for yourself in the future. Having said all of that, if I put this fan in here and hold it up, I think we can agree it's a pleasingly slender and low profile package that potentially has an epic amount of cooling on offer. I mean, 220 watt TDP is not to be sniffed at. So the big question is, how well does it work? When I built the test system for the Be Quiet cooler, I took my own advice. I installed the ASRock Z97 motherboard along with Core i7-4770K as an assembly along with the Be Quiet Dark Rock TF cooler into this Silverstone Fortress FT05 case, and that all went fair enough. Silverstone makes a point when you're building the system, it's a bit of a wacky case with the motherboard going vertically, that you put the power supply in first and go from there, and that's all fine. And the funny thing was that having said to myself, and indeed to you, that you need to put it in as an assembly to avoid all sorts of grief, I then forgot to connect the 8-pin EPS connector to the top of the motherboard before I kind of slipped the board fully into place. It's just one of those things. So I was faced with the question of, did I remove the motherboard, reconnect it, or did I try and take the cooler out and put the block connector in place and then put the cooler back? And I went for the latter. So around the back of the case, I removed loosen off the four screws which go into the female threads on the cooler body, and cooler body comes away, connect the power connector, that's fine. Then of course you have to put the four studs back into place. And that was exactly as tricky as I thought. And the reason is that the four studs on that backplate, they slide slightly because you've got those three positions for LGA 775, 11.5X and 1366. And the position I wanted was approximately in the middle. So had it been a Noctua cooler, backplate in with the studs, in it goes, bop, 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 nuts go on, easy peasy. In this instance, you're putting it in and you're trying to line up the four slightly slidey studs with the invisible female threads which are hidden away behind the enormous body of the cooler. And it was just tricky, would be the best way of describing it. It took me 15 to 20 minutes. It took me a couple of attempts. Now, in fairness, because the base plate is clipped in with those four C-clips, it doesn't kind of try and drop out at you, so there's that to be thankful for. The cooler doesn't weigh the earth, so there is that, but you do have to support it while you're trying to engage the threads, and you have to get all four in place. First time around I got three and no problem. One was slightly out of line and that wasn't going to work. Got there in the end anyway. Everything I said in the preamble about the pain of installing this cooler, exactly true. Performance. Now, before I started using the cooler, I had my doubts about it in the sense that it's got 6mm heat pipes and it doesn't have direct contact on the base plate. You can see in the photos you've got the nickel coated base. You'll also see in one of the photos, a couple of photos, what looks like a thumb mark. It's certainly a mark, whether it's a finger or thumb or just something that looks like one. Now, I'm not too sure about that. It doesn't wipe off, so it's not just like a fingerprint. It's something that's happened, I would guess, during the manufacturing process. I must confess I have seen this on occasion over the years, but it looks to me like it's almost when you get grease and nastiness from your hands, people's hands, sort of etched into metal. The surface of the cooler heat exchanger looks to my eye to be perfectly smooth. There is no manufacturing defect I can see, it's just that mark catches my eye. If you look at a reflection of written words, for example, in the base plate, you'll often, this is just a tip really, look at a reflected piece of text or indeed some lines in the base plate, the mirror base plate, and you'll see if it's distorted, concave or convex, if the reflection is or is not true. This base plate on this cooler looks good. If it wasn't for that mark, I would have no reservations about that whatsoever. The heat pipes, on the other hand, I'm looking at this going, 6mm heat pipes, that's okay, not so bad. 220 watt Tdp rating for the cooler, got my doubts about that, I really have. Similarly, the lack of direct contact. Direct contact, it works. It takes out a chunk of, it takes out a block in the flow of the heat. So I had my reservations about that 220 watt Tdp rating. When I fired the system up, I initially had these two case fans at the bottom of the Silverstone disconnected because afterwards there went to be a test of the CPU cooler and its two Be Quiet Silent Wings fans, not of the Silverstone side of the equation. So I left the case fans disconnected. The air in this case flows from the bottom and up and out the top. and leaving the case fans disconnected was a mistake. The temps were idling in the mid-30s and went up to 65, 70, which is simply too high for a Core i7 that's only being stressed, but stressed at stock clocks. So I reconnected the case fans, ran it again, temps much better, 24, 25 idling, and up to mid-50s, 55 Celsius, with the CPU stressed like heck in Ada 64. It's a completely unnatural, unreasonable stress test. That's the point. The cooler, it sat there, fans running at high speed, either 1200 watts or 1200 RPM or 1300 RPM. There is a sort of a setting below that which is 1000, that works just as well, and everything was happy, no problems whatsoever. Where things get a bit more tricky, shall we say, is when you overclock. Now, overclocking your Core i7, it's tried and true. A little bit more core voltage perhaps, whack up the turbo, more speed, no problem. Thing is that the ASRock BIOS, which has one of these one-click sort of pick your speed and off you go jobs, we know they're a little bit brutal. They whack in a lot of extra power. It's something in the order of 0.2 extra volts for the core, and I chose the 4.4 gigahertz setting knowing the ASRock BIOS was going to be brutal on the processor, and indeed it was. The point was I wanted to draw extra power. I wanted to see how much power the cooler could take. Now, when I was running the Core i7 at stock clocks, the system was drawing 125 watts at the wall socket under load, 55 watts at idle. 125 watts, allowing for the fact you've got a graphics card ticking over and such, like you're in the 95 odd watt territory for the processor, which, considering it's a 95 watt TDP, makes perfect sense. So you're taking about 30 watts for the system and about 95 watts for the processor. With the system overclocked using the ASRock BIOS, the power draw went up to 200 watts at the wall socket. So using the same maths, about 170 watts for the CPU. That's a lot of juice for a processor, and you're talking an extra 75 watts going in the core for that bit of extra speed, extra 500 megahertz speed. But you know, that's brutally overvolted. But 170 watts is way shy of the 220 watt rating, TDP rating of this cooler. So although it's a horrible way to overclock the processor and it's not a way I'd recommend, it should be well within the capability of the CPU cooler. And the thing is, to my mind, the Dark-Rock TF, it struggled because the temperatures without the case fans, they went straight up to 98 and then sat there. So clearly it was throttling because the power draw was about 170 watts. With the case fans connected, the temperature whacked up to the mid-90s in time. It sort of hit 80 very quickly and then kept on creeping up and up and up. But it did get to the mid-90s and the power draw was 200 watts. So I do not think it was throttling, not quite. But it was so far shy of the 220 watts. 50 watts inside the TDP limit, and that's with the fans roaring away at full speed, the case fans going at full chat. The system's quite noisy because the top, with the side panel on and the grid in place, the top of the Silverstone case is very open. Airflow is substantial, and I could feel it quite clearly. And while I wouldn't say it was noisy, it certainly wasn't quiet. So I was giving the cooler all the help I could give it, and yet, despite being 50 watts inside the TDP, the temperature is up, mid-90s. So I'm going to put my marker down here and say, this 220 watt TDP rating, as with so many manufacturers' claims, I don't think it's entirely right. But you can undeniably use this cooler on your overclocked processor, just not by whacking in silly amounts of overvolting. So yes, you can overclock. I dispute the 220 watt figure on the other hand. The Be Quiet fans, I was impressed by the Silent Wing fans. They work well, they're quiet, they flow a lot of air, they do a good job. The body of the cooler, the manufacturing, I like. The 6 heat pipes, the small heat pipes, I've got my doubts about that. I'd like to see 4 8mm heat pipes, direct contact ideally. It just feels like it will work better. We've seen it in so many other manufacturers. It seems a bit peculiar that Be Quiet, this brand new cooler, has gone for 6 small heat pipes. But there we have it. The mounting system, on the other hand, that is the single biggest bugbear. This is a premium high-end cooler that's selling for over £60 in the UK with VAT, and yet the mounting is a pain in the neck. I don't much like the way that a large air cooler fills the motherboard. It covers over the memory, it blocks your power connectors, it blocks your fan connectors. I don't like that. But provided I can take the cooler off quite easily to connect things and disconnect things, it's not the end of the world. A liquid cooler, you can just reach around and it's all there. but we know some people don't like liquid coolers. With this air cooler, removing the body of the cooler is possible. I thought it'd be nigh on impossible. It is possible. It's just tricky. Putting it back on is not fun. So that's kind of fundamental to a large air cooler. But the mounting mechanism that bequiet has stuck with since the Pro 3, it needs some work, people. Look at Noctua. Forget about the fact you can mount LGA 775s on. Take some of these permutations out of the equation. Tidy up the mounting. It will make life better. It will improve the product, and that's what we're after here. So, bequiet Dark Rock TF. Yes, it's a good cooler. No, I do not believe the 220 watt Tdp rating. I don't need all those options for mounting the thing, thank you. The price, it's a bit high for what you're getting, but it's definitely up at the premium end. And in that territory, it's got some stiff competition. No two ways about it. So this is the Awarded for Kit Guru. This is the bequiet Dark Rock TF.